All right, welcome back to Toy Informer for another episode of Gaming Gold. This is the video game series where I talk about those old school video games you might find at like yard sales, flea markets, just out there somewhere in the wild. These are games that are worth more than you might be even close to realizing. Like some of these are very shocking in how much money you can get for an old video game, whether it be just loose, complete with the box, or even brand new. If you somehow stumble across a sealed game, that's a whole different story. But realistically, I'm starting with the concept of you just finding a loose cartridge, disc, whatever it might be. Some of those games are worth a ton more than you might expect. Hopefully you're enjoying this series as well as everything else here on the channel. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you hit the alert button so you don't miss anything. And also keep telling your friends so we can keep growing this tiny little separate channel that I have talking about all my toys, interest, and video game interests, and a lot of weird stuff that are outside of comic books. Now, with that said, this week's edition of Gaming Gold is focused in on a particular system, and I put out a poll last week to figure out what you guys wanted to see next, and the resounding answer was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. So, this is not by any means all-encompassing. We can do many more shows featuring many more games that are also worth talking about, but I do have a first selection of games that we can talk about for those original NES cartridges. So, you know what I'm talking about. Those square little carts, you can find them out there. Some of them are worth more than you might expect. So, if you want to see this week's list, just hang out for a few seconds after the intro, and I will be right back. All right, so I'm trying a different background this time out to kind of do something a little bit more generic and a little bit easier on the eyes. Hopefully it works. Let me know what you guys think. But this is our current episode of Gaming Gold that will be focused in on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And the very first NES game that I would like to talk about is this bad boy right here, Bucky O'Hare. Yes, it's not Jackson from Star Wars, even though it is a different green rabbit. This is Bucky O'Hare, and I'm sure you guys remember this game. It was also a toy line, so a lot of extra, little curricular things that go along with this title. This was a platformer game from 1992. Just to kind of refresh your memory of what the gameplay might have looked like, it would have been more along the line of this, where you're doing sort of a side-scrolling shooter-up kind of thing, where you're kind of jumping around, almost Mega Man-like, if you will. Definitely a platformer in the classic sense of the word. I mean, most games were platformers back in the day, and I do kind of miss that that aspect. But I mean, we get what we got now. I mean, I'm not going to throw away the open world, 3D exploration that we have in games today. But part of me does miss the simplicity of games from back in the day. Now, just because the game was simplistic in terms of what we compare to today's games doesn't mean that this thing isn't worth a chunk of change, because this cartridge right here, Bucky O'Hare, if you find a loose one out there, $155 for this. 155 bucks for this cartridge. Cartridge alone, like I said. You don't need the box or any of that. I mean, you get it. It'd be nice if you have the manual or you have the little NES slipcase. Obviously, everything extra will help, but just the card alone, 155 bucks on average sales. Now, looking at what you might get if you do have complete inbox, now you're looking at 600 bucks. You still have it sealed by some chance. That's $1,700. $1,700 for this. That is an ornament. That's an extraordinary amount of money to me, but it is what it is. And if you don't believe me, here we go. Here's a recent sale of a complete edition with the with the cartridge and the manual, etc. Auction, 30 bids, went over $1,000. So once again, just to give you a sense of what these games could go for, and depending on how much you have to keep them or get them close to complete, this is what we're talking about as far as money goes. So over $1,000, almost $1,100 for that Bucky O'Hare. Again, it's an impressive thing, and it's just worth knowing. You never know sometimes. You never know sometimes what you might stumble across when you're out there in the wild. But that is our first game, and by no means our most expensive game of the day. That's just kicking us off. Up next, I have another option for you. if you know me, you guys know I like Dungeons and Dragons. I don't get to play it all that often, but I do love the concept of it and wish I did have a game I could play Dungeons and Dragons around here with, or had friends that played it. But unfortunately, I am without that. But this game, anyone could play if you got an NES. RPG from 1993, Hills Far is the subtitle or subsector, I guess, the extra bit of this game to kind of narrow it down. But Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Hills Far came out 1993. Classic RPG. You can see here with some of the screenshots, you got a little bit of an open world, but a little bit of exploration involved there. You got their little start screen. You got a whole city type where you can move around amongst the city. You got all your health points and your different dexterity and all your different, your classes and whatnot that you got to build up and level up as you go through. It's an RPG. It is what it is. But just to give you a reminder of the game. Now, if you can still find this game out there, just the cartridge alone, you would have done well and found yourself $165 on average. $165 just for the cartridge. Complete in box, so you got everything else, $350. Still sealed, $728. Those are the average sale prices. And again, here's a recent example from the last 3 months to show you how a complete edition of this game sold for $360 back at the end of January. So that $350 is pretty close. So again, just trying to show you prices and averages and give you a sense of at this moment in time what some of these games might be worth. So things just to put in your mental Rolodex when you're out there flipping through somebody's yard sale table, you're walking down a flea market aisle, you might be looking for toys or comics, and you just happen to see a stack of video games and go, hey, old NES games. Wonder if there's anything worthwhile in there. These are some things that might stand out if you remember them, and hopefully you do, and hopefully you find them, because then you found yourself a few extra bucks. Obviously, depending on what they're charging at the flea market. When I say things like flea market, I'm not expecting to be charging $300 for a used, complete video game. But hey, who knows? Who knows? Up to you what you want to spend. Now, let's get into a fun one here. I didn't even know or remember that they actually made a video game for this. And I had an NES. I played tons of NES games, and I love this movie to death. But I didn't realize there was a Die Hard video game on the Nintendo Entertainment System that was released in 1991. Considered a shooter platformer, still kind of in the same kind of vein. But man, like I said, this one was a surprise to me. I didn't know there was a game that went with it. And it's got all the things you might expect that go with this game. We got Nakatomi Plaza. We've got little screenshots of not only Bruce Willis's character, but Hans Gruber's in there too. And you got little, cut scenes that they would show from those classic NES games, where the text just starts writing itself on screen while the music is playing ominously in the background. And you can see here, you're kind of walking around it is what it is. As far as graphics-wise goes, you know what you're getting. But still seems like a game that I would love to have tried and played back in the day. Unfortunately, I missed it. Got to look for it now. If you find just the cartridge today, well, you did yourself a favor. You got yourself $190. $190 on average just for the cartridge alone. If you find it complete with the box, well, $490. Still sealed somehow? Almost $2,000. Granted, it is Die Hard, so you get a little bit of a bump there, especially when we're talking about still sealed, because when we're talking about sealed games, a lot of folks these days like to get these things graded, and games that are tied in with either classic properties that everybody knows, the Mega Mans and Zeldas, etc., or movie-related properties like Die Hard here, those have they bring in different audiences, so some of those games could go for a bit more when we're really talking about those really collectible ones that might get graded via one of the gradings, places out there. Now, again, just to give you a real world example, real-time sale from March 6th, $600 for a complete box of this. So $600 above that $490 average for a complete edition of Die Hard with the manual and everything in there. Just so you know, just so you're aware. With that said, we've got more games to talk about here, and we got another movie adaptation to get to. And I don't remember playing this one either, but I probably would have if I had it at the time. Wayne's World. Yes, they actually had a Wayne's World game, platformer from 1993. I think at this point I'd probably moved on and was part of my Super Nintendo system, so maybe that's why I might have missed out on some of these. I don't know. I just don't really remember this game, Wayne's World. I don't know why. I feel like I should have remembered it, but I don't. Here's some screenshots of it to give you a sense of what the Wayne's World platformer would have looked like. Yeah, I guess it's some sort of wild kung fu fighter. It looks like you got Garth there with some sort of blaster. I don't know what's going on. I see drum sets. You're probably just bouncing around. Classic craziness that they put into a video game. And they slapped Wayne and Garth in there. And then you got, look, Psycho Hose Beast right there chasing you with the flowers. Cool. This one, if you find Wayne's World, just the cartridge alone, you're looking at $190, very similar to Die Hard. If it's got complete with the instructions and all that stuff, $656. That's a decent amount there too. And just like Die Hard with the sealed one, it's a big number if you can find a complete sealed set at $2,600 on average. $2,600 for Wayne's World on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And just again, a complete edition right there, kind of going along with that price I showed you, $650. One sold for $700. Complete in-box, game and manual, $700. Not saying you're going to find these things out there, but it doesn't hurt to know it. And it's kind of a fun little trip down memory lane to look at this stuff anyway. And by some happenstance, if you do, hopefully you remember this show and you remember these things that I'm telling you about if you stumble across them when you're out there in the wild, just doing your normal day-to-day. And maybe you find yourself a nice little treasure, because that's kind of the fun of this. With that said, we're not done yet. I still got more games for you. Not many, but I got a few more. Up next, we're going to go to another property that is familiar. Not a movie this time out, but a television show that I'm sure we all watched growing up, if you're the same age as me, and that is the Jetsons. So here, the Jetsons had a game, Cogswell's Caper. Yeah, I got tongue-tied there for a second. 1992 platformer, because again, most games were platformers back then, because that was the style of play we had on that original Nintendo system. Just to give you a sense of it, as you probably could guess, you got a little bit of flying and a little flying cars jumping around, a lot of robots, Cogswell in a little ship, got little bits of Mega Man vibes, because again, that's kind of the format of most games from back in the day. But Jetsons, Cogswell's Caper, this cartridge alone, if you find just the cartridge, $268. $268 from this Hanna-Barbera project. So not bad. Still, with the manual and all that stuff in the box, $553. Not too bad. And if it's somehow still sealed, $2,200. Because again, it's classic. A lot of people remember the Jetsons. And another 3-month ago example, 37 bids at auction, $610 for a complete in-box set. And the picture there shows you the manual and everything in there. Real prices here, folks. Craziness. With that said, we're moving on. We've still got more to get to. And here's one I might have talked about before, but hell, I'm going to do it again. And it's one of my favorite cartoons of all time and one of my favorite games to play. That was DuckTales. But this is DuckTales 2. DuckTales 2, platformer from 1993. This one, again, very similar gameplay to that first game that we've got. You're bouncing around as Scrooge McDuck. I believe even part of this was, I think this might have even been originally DuckTales 3 over in Japan, but we only got it as part 2. I'm not 100% on that, but I remember reading something about that. And yeah, just to give you a sense anyway, this is DuckTales again. So more of that bouncing Uncle Scrooge action as you're playing through this. Again, I love playing the original game. I don't recall playing the second one all that well, but hey, I could have. My memory's not that clear to differentiate between the games. I just know I remember playing the original DuckTales and loving it. And this one, if you can find two, and this is probably why I probably didn't have it, is because I think it was a little tough to find. And it's tougher to find today because a card alone is $285. Almost $300 just for the cartridge alone for DuckTales 2. Complete in box, well, we're looking at almost $800. And if you somehow still find one sealed, $6,500. That's right. That's a big jump. The other ones were like $2,000, which I thought was a big number there. $6,500 for a DuckTales 2 still sealed. And here's your real world example of a complete in box version for $750. Pretty close to that $800, $796 average. So $750 back at the end of January for a complete in box edition of this game. Now, we're almost through. We're not through yet, but I got another one for you. You might be familiar with it. It's another sequel. So sometimes these sequels, they don't get as big a play as their original games, and then they get a little tougher to find in later years. So that gets to be part of why they're cost so much. But Bobble Part 2. More alliterations. You're really going to get your tongue-tied here. Another platformer from 1993. Very similar to the original Bobble. You're just kind of bouncing around. You're a little dragon dude with a lot of bubbles. You see it. Boom. Probably looks familiar. Probably played it. Probably played the first one. But if you somehow stumble into the second one, this sequel, well, the cartridge alone for Bubble Bobble Part 2 is $362. $362. And just to show you what the box looks like, in case you can find it with the box and the instructions out there, $810. If it was somehow still sealed, now we're talking $3,200. Still a huge number. Nintendo Entertainment System, 1993 platformer. And here again is a recent example on eBay of a complete edition. Actually, it doesn't even say complete. It doesn't even look like the manual's there, but it does have the box and the cart. It's still got the cartridge and the cartridge case and the box. $950. So it's getting that complete in box price, but I'm not even sure it's complete because I do not see the manual in that picture. But that's what I'm talking about. The more you got, the more you can get. With that said, we're almost through it. I think I got one more example before we get to our ghost. And our last example here, I think, is this one. This is a crazy game. I do not remember playing this. Zombie Nation is not what you would expect. You hear Zombie Nation, you're thinking Walking Dead. You're thinking probably more something along the lines of Friday the 13th video game on NES, where you're just walking through, maybe hacking and slashing some sort of platformer fighter or whatever. No, this is a shooter from 1990, and it is wild. If you look at some of these screenshots and some of the gameplay footage, there's a flying, floating head, and you're in like creepy houses and flying through cities. So it's almost like a arcade shooter of like a jet, but it's a head floating around. I don't know how zombies come into play with this. And then there's the dude with a big nose down there. Crazy looking game, really wild stuff. And that's partly a lot of the appeal and why a lot of people want to collect this today is because it's just batshit insane. But this game, if you can find just the cartridge of Zombie Nation, $417. $417 just for the cartridge. Complete in box, well, now you're already talking about $1,000. And then if you can get that sealed one, well, now you're talking about $4,000. So another big time example of a game that is just tough to find, just crazy, and that's part of its appeal and why many folks are looking for it today. Here's an example of a sale of it with the box. Doesn't look like it even has the manual, but it's just the game in the box. $1,200. So above that complete in box price, $1,200 for this Zombie Nation. Crazy, right? I don't know, man. That's a wild game. Oh no, we're not done. I still got more for you. I'm sitting here. I lost count of how many games. I try to do 10 games in a show, so sometimes going along, I start losing track. But I do got another one following Zombie Nation, and that's this one. I got Panic Restaurant for you. Yes, I know what you're thinking. It's probably like Burger Time. But this is a platformer from 1992. Here's some screenshots to remind you of what Panic Restaurant was. It is a game that, well, again, side-scrolling action. It's just side-scrolling platformer. Again, I keep bringing up Mega Man because that's what I see with a lot of these screens. It looks like I'm looking at a Mega Man game. But that's also because Mega Man is one of my favorites, just to be fair. With that said, Panic Restaurant. Did not play this one. Did not have this one, myself. But for those of you who might still have it, tucked away in a box at your parents' house, in a closet or attic somewhere, your old NES games, go look, because maybe you do have this. It was a game you got for Christmas, so you didn't want to play it because it seemed silly, but it's now $775 if you still have that cartridge tucked away somewhere, or if you stumble across it out at a flea market somewhere, almost $800 for just the cartridge. If you can find the box, well, complete in box is $2,500. And if it's somehow still sealed, yes, $10,000 for Panic Restaurant. Still sealed. 10 grand. Yes. Real world sale example for you. Just the game and the box. No manual. $1,900 March 3rd. Wasn't that long ago. $1,900. So it's not quite complete in box, but the game and the box, $1,900. With that, I believe those were our regular edition games for you. Now, I know I lost count. No, we're done now with the regular edition, but as close as Panic Restaurant was to getting this category, I do have a separate Ghost Edition. No, it should have been more moved over. I got to reformat it for my new show layout. But this is a game you all probably know. And that's why I wanted to cover this one now, because I know a lot of you have heard of this, and this is one of those stories of a game that people have talked about in whispers and look for all the time. It's a mythic game to many. Stadium events. Yes, NES, Family Fitness from Bandai, stadium events. Considered maybe I guess we'll call it a sports game, because that's what it was, from 1986. Is it because it had such uplifting gameplay of like, wow, this is really game breaking, game changing? Well, no, it's just very simple Olympic type stadium events, racing, etc. But it is not easy to find, which is why you will see prices like this. If you somehow find this cartridge, the cartridge alone, $16,000. Yeah. Again, that's why I brought it up. I know a lot of people know of this. It's not a surprise. The prices might surprise you now where we're currently at, but $16,100 average sales. And you're probably saying, that's not a real number. Well, one sold for 15 grand just on March 8th. So yeah, just the cartridge alone, $15,000. Now, once again, we could probably dig in to see the accepted price, but from what I can see, it looked like it sold for 15. But point being, it's a lot of money. So we don't need to get into the semantics of going into the exact price. That's a lot of money, as is the complete inbox price of $42,000. You could buy a car, or you could buy a complete inbox version of this game. And then we have the sealed version, which is $168,000, which could buy you a home in many states. Not my state, but in a lot of states out there, you can find a decent sized home for 168 grand. But not New Jersey. New Jersey ain't gonna get that much for that price. But point being, $168,000 for a video game is wild. But once again, I wanted to bring this one up now with our first NES special edition of this show. Again, there's a lot more games that I didn't even touch upon that are still worth knowing, worth tons and tons of money that we can get to down the line. So let me know in the comments down below if you want more NES, you want me to switch back to Super NES. We can go to Xbox, PlayStation, anywhere you want to go, Jaguar. There's still a lot of game systems we haven't touched. We can even go old school Atari or Commodore 64 action if you want. I just love looking back on this stuff because I've played video games for pretty much my entire life. So this stuff is interesting to me to even go back and look at these prices. So hopefully it's interesting to you. And that was our last game of the day. So our Ghost. And with that, I just want to thank you all for the support that I have here. Not only this channel, but on my main channel, Renovision, where I mostly talk comics and pop culture. But this is still that other stuff that I still love. The toys, the video games, the weird collectibles like t-shirts and sneakers and popcorn buckets, fruit snack wrappers and boxes. There's a lot of fun stuff we can still cover, and hopefully you're on board for it. And thanks again for that support. And until next time, I'll see you all later. All right, bye.